All right, friends, I am so freaking excited about our next speaker. Our next speaker started off as one of the people that I admired in this country. She's one of the top fundraisers in this entire country. She owns a portfolio of companies that are some of the brand names in this country. She travels all over the world. I accidentally woke her up from a sleep in Singapore 4 days ago at 5 o'clock in the morning. Travels all around the world teaching and speaking, and she's here with us today. I'm going to play a little video so you can get to know my friend Michelle.
Happy to have you guys.
All right, yeah.
I love this guy. How y'all doing today? Woo! This is a great room, and the best part about being here is Ken and I have been on this journey through when he started this to just seeing how massive this has grown today. You know, what I'm here to share with you is all the things I wish I would have known before I went on my crazy entrepreneurial journey. And there's really 3 things I wish I would have known. The first is that building a business is messy. So for me to be successful, I would really have to roll up my sleeves and get scrappy. Second thing that I would have to learn is that all the planning in the world wouldn't make me successful. I needed to move from planning straight into execution. And the third thing that took me the longest to learn is that great innovation doesn't come from one Eureka moment. It comes from hundreds of pieces of iteration that gets you to somewhere massive. So let me take you back with me. I'm going to take you to the very beginning of my story. I grow up in Calgary, and my parents tell me I can study anything I want as long as it is engineering. So I have an abundance of choice going into undergrad. So there I am, being a good little student, getting into Queen's engineering. Figure out pretty quickly I'm going to be much better at building businesses than building bridges. So I start this little coffee shop on campus, get that going, kind of catch the bug, and it's there I meet 2 guys that I ended up working with for the next decade. And we played one game with all of our spare time. And that game was, what's the next $1 million idea? And we brainstormed through hundreds of different ideas. I mean, we were looking at, I remember we wanted to make like water bottles in PLA plastic that biodegraded. So we made one in a lab, and then we came back the next morning, and instead of there being a water bottle with water in it, there was just a puddle of water. So our biodegradable properties like worked a bit too well. You know, we looked at bringing in products from China, customizing them in Canada. We looked at early apps from the iPhone store instead of finally settling on pursuing caviar and fish farming that 3 21-year-olds could have possibly come up with. But we had really good reason. Worldwide supply of caviar was down by 98%. The world had just overfished the Caspian Sea. I mean, this was a chart from Google, so we have to believe it was true. So at this point, I want to be clear. I have never eaten caviar, and worse off, I've never gone fishing before. But I figure, you know, this is an old product that has an old luxury cachet. You know, if there's a market for it, then, you know, we should be able to, like, people should still want it. So I'm testing the market. I'm in the library. I Google famous chefs in America. Thomas Keller's name pops up. And from my flip phone in the library, I call this famous restaurant in California called the French Laundry. Say something about, you know, caviar, and the receptionist actually puts me on the phone with Thomas. So nervous at this point. Only thing that I can get out of my mouth is, Thomas, I'm wondering why you don't have caviar on your menu. And there's this long pause. And he goes, do you have any? I'm like, I'm a Queen's University student calling you from a library. Of course I don't have any caviar. But I knew at that second that if one of the most famous chefs in America could not get this product, I would have a very captive audience if I could make it. So off we went. We did what every single business student was told to do. We wrote one of those 100-page business plans. We had an Excel model that projected everything for 10 years. And we quickly figured out that we were going to need some capital to build a fish farm. So we were in school. The first thing we did is we started entering business plan competitions. You go to a competition, you present your idea, the winner gets $25,000. And we didn't win the first one, and we didn't win the second one, but we won the third, fourth, and fifth one. And so we graduated with $100,000 in prize money, which is great. Until I tell you we needed $6 million to start a fish farm. So we're barely on a drip in the bucket. So what do we have to do? We really had to get scrappy. We needed to figure out how to make caviar and make caviar quickly, and show to investors that if we could sell this product direct to the end restaurant because it was in such strong demand, that we could build this. So we figured out through our research that there was a wild supply of caviar available in New Brunswick that hadn't been caught for a bunch of different reasons by a bunch of different people. And so I remember graduating, and we got into my co-founder's 20-year-old Toyota Camry and drove from Toronto all the way to New Brunswick. And the first thing we figured out when we got there is, in Canada, you can't just go fishing. You need a license to go fishing. And so I remember calling fisheries saying, hey, I'm looking to get a sturgeon fishing license. And the woman was like, oh, that's a nice thought, but those have been grandfathered for 20 years. And I was like, shoot, this is not working out well for me. So then I said, well, look, does anyone else have a sturgeon fishing license I could fish under? She goes, yes. There's 5 people in the province of New Brunswick that still have a grandfathered sturgeon fishing license. I said, great. Can you give me their names? And she goes, no, that would violate all the privacy rules. I can't give you those names. So I called back every day from a different phone number with a different accent, asking the identical question until someone gave me the names of those 5 people with the licenses. So now I had their names, but certainly not their phone numbers. So I'm calling every single Elmer Smith in the phone book. And if you think you've been hung up on, and you guys are all going into build businesses right now, this is gonna happen, you got nothing on me. I'm calling being like, hi, I'm looking for the man with the sturgeon fishing license. We're like, what? So I finally get the right one. His wife picks up the phone. She correctly says, no one's ever called asking about this. And she puts me on the phone with Elmer. And these fish were exceptionally valuable. If you've ever seen a sturgeon, they're like a 200-pound fish. They're massive. And when they're at the right point, when the females have eggs, each fish could be worth between $5,000 and $10,000. So in the back of my mind, I'm willing to pay up to $5,000 a day to rent this license. So I'm on the phone with Elmer and I say, Elmer, I'd really like to rent your fishing license. How much do you want for it? And he goes, for you, sweetheart. If you've ever seen Dragon's Den, I hate when people call me sweetheart. So I'm like, a really famous line in my first season where Jim goes, hold it, sweetie. And I don't call me sweetie. I have all that rage inside me. I'm like, Michelle, you have one name and one guy and one license. Do not dial in the sweetheart hill. So I was like, okay, Elmer, how much do you want for your license? And he goes, for you, sweetheart, how about $500 for the summer? And I was like, oh my God, we have a deal. You can call me sweetheart every day. So now we have a license. And I was like, great, can we go fishing tomorrow? And he goes, oh no, Michelle, I'm 75 years old. I can't go fishing anymore. And just as my heart was sinking to the floor, he goes, but you can find another commercial fisherman to fish under my license. So I was like, great. Got the license. This has got to be the hard part. We can find a commercial fisherman. So we're literally looking around town. I think I asked the woman that worked at Subway sandwiches if she knew a commercial fisherman. We finally find this woman in the government. She's like, oh yeah, I got a friend, Ted. He'll be a good fisherman for you. I was like, great. Does Ted have an email or a phone number? And she's like, oh, that's not how you find Ted. You're going to go up the road. You're going to go left at the blue house and right at the greenhouse, and the little yellow house is Ted's. And I'm like, I guess they do things a lot differently in New Brunswick. So I get to what is the little yellow house and knock on the door, and there's nobody there. But I think I'm in the right place because there's fishing gear all over the lawn. So we get back into this 20-year-old Toyota Camry in the middle of the July heat with no air conditioning. And all I can think to myself is, I have an engineering degree and an MBA, and I'm literally stalking a fisherman right now. So thank God. Ted finally comes home 12 hours later. And we're like, Ted, will you go fishing for us? And he's like, yeah, no problem. I was like, great. Can we get started tomorrow? And then Ted says something to me that I'll never forget. He goes, I just have one problem. I don't have a boat. I was like, what kind of fisherman doesn't have a boat? This is like a property manager without a house. It's just not going to work. So I said, okay. And sorry, to be clear, we didn't need a fancy boat. We needed like a 20-foot boat with an outboard motor. Like, this is not expensive. So I found Ted a boat, did my first financing deal. I said, look, every fish you catch, we'll deduct a little bit, and you get the boat by the end of the summer. So now we're off to the races. We have the license, we have the fishermen, we have the boat. We, had CFI approved a processing facility for us. So we're waking up at the crack of dawn at 6 a.m. every day. We're driving an hour and a half to go find Ted. We're picking the fish that we wanted, that he's caught, to go process. We're then going to process the fish ourselves, which is like a very polite word for like making caviar. Every once in a while in the Q&A, someone will be bold enough to be like, so how did you guys know how to make caviar? And in the spirit of honesty, we watched a series of YouTube videos that were entirely in Russian to figure out how to do this. And so one of the unique things about caviar is once you put it in a jar, it has a shelf life of a year. But that whole fish itself, you got to sell right away because it's fresh. So then it would be, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon by the time we processed all these fish. And we would get on these flip phones and we would be like, hey, I'm calling you from Evandale Caviar. You've never heard of us because we incorporated 2 weeks ago. But we caught a fresh sturgeon right out of the water this morning. Do you want us to ship it to you? You have till 5 o'clock to tell us, because that's when FedEx closes. And as ridiculous as that pitch sounds, chefs loved it. The farm-to-table movement was just starting to happen. We were right in our thesis. People hadn't been able to get this product for years, and they all wanted to buy from us. So we finished the summer with, 300 of the high-end hotels and restaurants on board. We were making money. Everything was great. All of my friends and my parents, most importantly, who thought I was crazy, was like, wow, this really worked. And then in a second, everything changed. Because what I'm failing to tell you about the story is now we are in the fall of 2008, in the greatest recession of the last 50 years, and I am selling the world's most unnecessary luxury product. It's not very good positioning. And so when businesses fail, you have an exceptional amount of time to think. And the one thought my brain kept coming back to is everything we wrote in that business plan and everything we did in that Excel model, none of that happened. We figured out everything we needed to know the day we started executing that business. And I really got to this conclusion of this is where you need to stop planning and get going. I mean, when you start a business, you need to understand your market a little bit before you make a transaction. You need to understand your competition. But so many people spend so much time in planning mode, they never get into execution mode. So the second time we did this totally differently. The recession got so bad, I ended up taking a job at a big retailer as the director of strategy. I saw e-commerce blow up, and me and the same 2 guys that did the caviar business together got back together to Starbucks and decided that we ourselves were going to launch an e-commerce company in Canada. This is 2010. E-commerce is like 3% of retail sales right now. Nothing like it is today. So we decide that, number 1, we would launch at a trade show. Number 2, we would use overseas software developers because we didn't have the money to pay Canadians. And Number 3, that we would get a famous person to tweet for us. This was our entire business plan. It's pretty pathetic. So what happens? Well, we get to the day of the trade show, and the website isn't ready. The software developers claim that we haven't paid them enough. We're like, no. We've spent like our whole savings on going to this trade show. So when we launch at the trade show, we have a bunch of those like high stand-up tables with laptops on them. We don't actually launch with a website. We launch with a JPEG, which is a picture of a website. And we open it inside a browser window. And we make it look like a website, and we have just enough coding knowledge from engineering to remember how to program in the buy button. And so then what happens? We have the famous person tweet for us, and that does nothing. But what did happen is we sold our first $10,000 that very first trade show. I got to meet so many potential customers and understand what they were looking for. And I truly never guessed from there we would go on to become one of the fastest growing Canadian companies. We exited the business 4 years later, and we grew a massive database in Canada, all off the last $15,000 that was left in our Evandale Caviar bank account. So one of the things that I always think it's my job to share as a founder is how often you need to fail to be successful. And most people don't share this part of the story, but I would say of all the projects I've done, I call them projects, because if I called them startups, it'd be too depressing. 80% have failed. And this is really important because it underlines the extraordinary resilience you will need as a founder going into building something from scratch. So, we have this e-commerce website where competitors are Groupon at the time. Margins are getting very, very compressed in this space. And so we're constantly trying to figure out, how to launch other businesses. The first business we launch is a scheduling software, like an open table, but for everything but restaurants. So you could book a spa appointment or a fitness appointment or your hair salon. We get 100 merchants on board, and we just can't make it work. We have to throw the whole thing out. This is after like a year of trying, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars invested. Second thing we try in 2010 is building a competitor to Uber Eats, where I remember my staff came in and they're like, who are all these people? And they're like, oh, Michelle's interviewing delivery drivers today. And these weren't small projects. We had the whole software built. We had 100 restaurants on board. We had receipt printers in all of them. Couldn't make the economics of that business work ever. Then we're like, okay, but we have a lot of customers and they like discounts. So, what else could we put in? And so then we do a printed home coupon website, and the CPG companies don't really like that much. But then we figure, what if we could actually allow people to save money on their groceries by just taking a photo of their receipt? And you have to remember this is 2012. Today, it is so normal to take pictures of text. We take pictures of a quote we like, we take pictures of a document or a PDF or a DocuSign. But in 2012, the cameras they're so early that it was very grainy to take text pictures. We literally sat in our office being like, is anyone gonna take a photo of a receipt? So we launched this app. Customers love it. We get every major consumer packaged good company on board. The Johnson & Johnson's, the Coca-Cola, the Nestle's. 8 months in, we have more than 1 million downloads in Canada, which is crazy. And the whole company gets bought by Groupon on the day of my 28th birthday. Oh, thank you. But the moral of the story at this point, all my friends are coming to me and they're like, Michelle, how did you do this? You launched an app, you sold it 8 months later, you made millions of dollars. I'm like, no. This wasn't 8 months. This was 8 years of iteration to get there. Because every time you have something fail or something not go right, you learn a little bit more of what your customer is looking for and how to do it a little bit better. And that is when you get to a big point of innovation. It doesn't ever happen with one Eureka moment and one idea ever. That's just a story that founders tell press when we don't have time to tell the real story. I mean, even when we started Clearco, my thesis was that, banks were going to be the next big digital thing disrupted. So we started building a bank for Uber drivers and all the 1099 contract workers in the US. We, had I think thousands of Uber drivers on board before we realized that was a really hard business to build. Then we started financing Airbnb hosts. And I think we had put up more than $10 million helping Airbnb hosts get capital to grow their properties by buying more leases or more homes. That's why I ended up knowing a little bit about the real estate business. That didn't work. At this point, I'm on Dragon's Den, and I'm like, I see all these entrepreneurs that have these like great e-commerce products, right? They come on the show saying, look, I'm looking for $100,000 and I'm willing to give up 10% of my company for my great new, product I'm selling online. And the craziest thing is when you ask those founders what they needed the money for, it's always the same two things. I need money for ad spend, and I need money for inventory. And I remember, at this point, I feel so inadequate. I joined the show when I was 28 years old. I'm definitely the youngest person there, and probably at that point, the poorest person there. But I remember thinking, why are founders using the most expensive capital in the world, which is equity, to do something that's really repeatable and scalable? So I said to the founder that day, look, I'm gonna do a different deal type. I'm gonna do like a Mr. Wonderful deal, but way better than that. I'll give you that $100,000 you're looking for, and instead of taking 10% of your business that I own forever, I just want 10% of your revenue until you pay me back my capital plus 8%. Founder's like, oh, that sounds like a loan. And I was like, A loan, if you didn't pay me back, I would take your company, and then if there was nothing valuable in your company anymore, I would take your house, because I'd have a personal guarantee. I said, this is very different. There's no personal guarantee here. And they're like, what's the hitch? And I said, well, you need to show me and connect me to your online digital data so I can see your daily payment processing, how your Facebook ads are converting, because I understand that really well. And the founder that day was like, let's do it. That was the incredible pivot that we did. This is the third thing we tried at Clearco. And that is what allowed us to deploy more than $5 billion to 10,000 entrepreneurs in 13 different countries, making us a unicorn. And the most impressive part about that story is hundreds of people told me that we wouldn't be able to do this, that the data wouldn't be good enough, that I'd have to take pitches, and what we actually showed was the opposite. When we looked back at our portfolio, half of the capital we deployed went towards women, which is extraordinary when I tell you that everywhere in the US and Canada and Korea, everywhere, in the venture capital world, only 2% of venture capital goes to women. We were 25 times the average. A third of our founders were minorities, and a quarter of our founders didn't go to post-secondary education. Because I have never been a believer that you need a certain education or a certain background to build a business. But my point is, it takes time. It takes all these little iterations where you cannot give up and you cannot stop learning from one thing that is leading to another. So if I was to go back, I would tell myself, Michelle, better be ready to roll up your sleeves and get real scrappy, because this is going to be very messy building a business. I had to get myself out of planning mode into execution mode, and that all of my iterations would lead to a couple big innovations. Thank you, guys.